and gentlemen, Frank Chase back with you one more time to talk about the subject of tithing and money. So today, in the last couple of days, I have placed a couple of short videos, book excerpts, book bubbles, and author insight from my book. And I'm going to continue to do this and share this with you in hopes of encouraging everyone to really get to studying this subject matter before you decide to believe whether tithing is or is not required in the New Testament. But before I get into that, I want to share some good news with all of my readers out there, wherever you may be, that my book, Kleptomaniac, Who's Really Robbing God Anyway, has received 2 awards, one for 2017 and one for 2018. And as you can see here, let me try to get this clearer to you, get it on the right side. As you can see here, I've won the 2017 New Apple Book Award and for excellence in independent publishing, and I won the 2018 Reader's Favorite Honorable Mention for nonfiction in religion and philosophy. You may want to pick this book up if you want to try to get it. You'll be able to get the book from all of the different book places that are selling the book. So the question is right now is, what are first fruits? Now, I've done a longer, extensive YouTube teaching, or I haven't done on this, but I want to break it down into smaller pieces for you today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start reading an excerpt from the book, and then I'm going to give you your author insight. So let's get right into it. I'm reading from chapter 9 of my book. Can money be required as first fruits? That's the quintessential question. Another teaching used as a slick fundraising tool is the topic of first fruits. If the 10% tithe doesn't burn a hole in your pocketbook or wallet, watch out, because tithe's first cousin, the first fruits doctrine, will sure hit you up for more money. The modern day version of the first fruits doctrine is causing fervor among believers around the country and the world. This phenomenon is emptying the wallets and pocketbooks of many unsuspecting believers. Fundraising gimmicks and twisted scriptural misinterpretations that promise wealth easily sifts money out of people's wallets and purses. Many people accept new teachings from the Bible without questioning the views of the teachers. It is amazing how many Christians interpret tithes and first fruits as money without undertaking an in-depth word study to seek biblical truth on the issue. A general definition from the dictionary ought to settle the argument. So why would people toss out the first fruits? So why would people toss out that first fruits are nothing but the earliest harvest of fruit dedicated to a deity, acknowledging the blessing of first fruitfulness? This doctrine of first fruits that emanates from the mouths of credible, authoritative spiritual figures in churches should not be taken at face value. You must examine every word with a fine-tooth comb, like an investigative reporter, and ask, who did God authorize to receive first fruits, and in what form? And that's a good question, and that's a good statement. Take a step to investigate what first fruits mean. It is important to understand that it is a common practice to define a person's income as first fruits based on current cultural and financial norms outside of the Bible. Make sure you pay attention to that. However, that's where the error begins, because the Bible defines first fruits as literal fruits, not first money. The first occurrence of first fruits is in Exodus 23:16, and it reads, "And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of your labors, which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. New King James Version. It is evident that first fruits is talking about crops, whatever you harvest from the field. It is not money. The New King James Version implies that first fruits come from the labor of what people planted. Reading this same verse in the NIV version actually reflects the correct rendering of the Hebrew word in Exodus 23:16, which states, "Celebrate the feast of harvest with first fruits of the crops you sow in the field. Celebrate the feast of ingathering at the end of the year when you gather in your crops from the field." You can't get no clearer than that, ladies and gentlemen. The Hebrew word for first fruits is bakwa. It's Strong's number 1061. It is the fruit of the grain, fruit, and crop harvested from the field. When Israel celebrated 3 feasts, it was their acknowledgement that the fruits of the harvest were from Yahweh. Further, that means the first fruits were from God's labor, not man's labor. Let's explain this in more detail. Everything we have comes from God. He gives us food, water, clouds, atmosphere, vapors, crops, grain, and animals to sustain life. For example, cotton comes from seed planted. Our houses are built of wood, which comes from seed planted. God's labor includes the rain, sunshine, and the right environment for cotton and trees to grow. This allows us to use cotton to make clothes and have wood to build homes. This could not happen without God using his labor to make things grow. So with God's effort, he requires the first fruits from his effort, not the effort that comes from man's labor to build houses or when making clothes, for example. Yahweh's effort produced first fruits and tithes. Our labor involves planting and harvesting. And that's the difference between man's labor and God's labor. The tithe and first fruits always came from God's effort and labor and not from what a person makes in income. That's because we earn income from selling our labor to an employer for a price and receive a paycheck. That means our labor is not holy, nor can our money be first fruits. One author writes that since the Israelite community in a full theocratic government had the tithe, it took care of Levites, priests, and other social services for the less fortunate. As a result, the theocracy would have no need of a further common fund to address social services because the tithe took care of that. Taxes, as we understand it, did not exist in Israel per se. That means if the tithe took care of everything, then an Israelite's personal labor, money from a job, could not be forfeited partially or wholly for the community, social services, a king, a church, as a tithe or as a tax to a government. The tithe was paid on the land's yield. That means the laborer of antiquity and those who work every day in the current economy, own their labor. Since God owned his own labor by providing produce, herds, and flocks, then the farmers and ranchers who inherited the land had to pay God a tithe from his labor, produce, herds, and flocks. The non-farming and non-rancher community who were daily workers owned their own labor and did not owe God a tithe. God owns the land because his labor created the tithe and the first fruits. So a tenth of the yield belonged to him. A worker like you and I own our own labor because we create it, and the fruits of it belong to no one else because we produced it through work. When you follow the tithe law in the Bible and the rules set up for the user and the leaser of the land with God as the legal owner, you realize the community, the central government, or any church cannot confiscate the money you work for in part or in whole for any good reason, either as a tax or a tithe. Today, tithes of money and taxes are collected because we live in a democracy and not a theocracy. Although the Levites did not receive a land inheritance, it was presumptuous to assume they were never without income. Numbers 10, 18, 20 through 32 is where you read about their income. The Levites inherited the tithe from Yahweh and had to work for income. Individuals in the Bible sold their labor for a price, and the profit from selling their labor belonged to them as a worker. The tithe came from the land, which God owned, not on the labor paid in wages by other workers outside of the farming and herding community. It is important to never confuse the tithe with first fruits because they are not the same, ladies and gentlemen. In Exodus 23:19, the same Hebrew word is used for first fruits. And it reads, "The first of the first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God." When you read this verse in the NIV, the RSV, the King James Version, and the New King James Version, notice that either the word land, ground, or soil is used, and all three refer to crops. First fruits are exactly what the Bible says, and that means they are fruits that grow from the ground first, or that which ripens first, which qualifies as first fruits. And to leave you off with this, before I read my author insight, first fruits actually fit in a basket and were given to the high priest. Go figure. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you got something out of that. That was a mouthful. It surely was a mouthful for me to read all of that to you. And so I'm glad you are listening to this particular this episode about first fruits, because you will hear a lot about that in church, that your first fruits is your first tenth of your income. And according to the Bible, that is simply not the case. First fruits have nothing to do with money, and don't let nobody fool you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read my author insight about this particular excerpt from the book, and let's get right into it. This part of the book that deals with first fruits was fascinating to write about. This is important because little did I know, first fruits in the Bible had nothing to do with paying money to a church. This is important because at any time in my previous church, the doctrine of paying first fruits became another money collection tactic. The dogma stated that if you pay a tenth of the first paycheck of the year, God would rain down blessings on you. Imagine my shock when I started researching the meaning of first fruits and found out that these were nothing but grapes, wine, barley, wheat, figs, olives, oil, honey, and pomegranates. Deuteronomy 8:8 and 18:4 and Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 11 reveals the details about first fruits. So the book excerpt about this important subject in analyzing tithing is important. First fruits being paid as money is total manipulation of the scriptures. So how do churches get away with inventing fundraising schemes by taking scripture out of context? Anybody with a simple concordance can take a look and examine the meaning of first fruits and discover they were edible items and not money. Remember, if someone asks you for first fruits, give them some grain, barley, figs, etc. It's fruit, people, and nothing else. Oh my goodness. So that's it for this author insight on that. And I just blew up the whole first fruits doctrine as being the first tenth of your paycheck. I just blew it up. I just dropped a nuclear bomb on that doctrine. And now you don't have to worry about that argument anymore, because first fruits is not money. It's edible items that were actually put in a basket and given to the priest. Well, that's the end of that, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of book bubble and author insight. And I'll be back again to share some more with you in the future. Thank you, and have a great day, y'all. Bye.